The following program contains adult themes. Some scenes may be too intense for some viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. Where does free will end and mind control begin? Can someone be guilty of a crime they may only have set in motion? These are the life and death questions that confront a woman accused of a shocking multiple murder.
They sat around, they had scriptural classes, they talked about the death of the Averys, they talked about how the Averys might be killed.
To execute people in the name of God is the most heinous crime I think I've ever heard of.
If those bodies had not been found, you'd still not be telling anybody that your husband was a cold-blooded murderer. Isn't that true?
That's true.
That's true.
She was Joseph Mengele, the angel of death.
January 3rd, 1990. In the small Ohio town of Painesville, 5 bodies were exhumed from the basement of a farmhouse. They were identified as Dennis and Cheryl Avery and their 3 daughters, Trina, 13, Rebecca, 9, and Karen, 5. All 5 had been bound with duct tape and then shot execution style in the back of the head. The Averys had belonged to a bizarre religious cult centered around 2 people, 43-year-old Jeffrey Lundgren and his wife, 39-year-old Alice. Within days after the bodies were found, the Lundgrens were caught and brought to trial for the cold-blooded murder of the Avery family. I'm Teresa Saldana. We need only recall the horrors of Jonestown, or the crimes of the cult family dominated by Charles Manson, to be reminded of what happens when a cult turns violent. How is it that otherwise decent people can go off the deep end, following a crazed leader? What kind of woman could marry, support, and even encourage such an evil person? Was Alice Lundgren a powerless pawn, brainwashed by her husband? Or was Alice a leader, a willing, enthusiastic, and crucial link in the warped plans of the cult? On tonight's journey into the mysteries of the criminal mind, we'll see Alice Lundgren's actual videotaped interrogation as we try to understand her role in this brutal and senseless murder. We will try to trace the motivations that caused Alice to follow her husband down his twisted road and led ultimately to a courtroom where she would stand trial in a fight for her life.
Alice is always a pretty dependable person. She never gave us any problems, was pretty well behaved. If she said, this is what I'm going to do, you could depend on that's what she was going to do. Her one goal in life was to be a nurse. And when she started to college, it was to be a nurse.
Alice had gone to a school that was affiliated with the RLDS church. She met Jeff in a church group. They were originally attracted to one another.
He was a nice appearing, well-mannered, caring person. And he treated us very nice. He always has treated us very nice. He's got along with all the rest of the family. He was just a very acceptable person as far as we were concerned. And she decided that they had to get married before he left to go into the Navy.
Alice and Jeffrey Lundgren married on May 5th, 1970, and quickly started their family. Their eldest son, Damon, was born while Jeff was still in the Navy. After Jeff's discharge from the service, the Lundgrens settled down in Missouri and had 3 other children, Jason, Christian, and Caleb. In 1983, Jeffrey became a lay minister in the RLDS, the Reorganized Church of Latter-day Saints, an offshoot of the Mormon Church. 1 year later, he moved his family to Kirtland, Ohio.
He felt that coming to Kirtland was a place that he could learn, that he could gain power. He believed in the scriptures where it said that you go to the Ohio to be endowed with power. He went to Ohio to learn and to have power.
However, his repeated conflicts with church officials over religious teachings led to his credentials being withdrawn.
We basically said, you can't do that in the church anymore. That is not permitted. He stopped attending church, withdrew himself from it in terms of his presence, began holding meetings in his home or other places, and to make a long story short, began encouraging other people to withdraw their membership from the church.
After being thrown out of the RLDS, Jeff and Alice became the patriarch and matriarch of their own splinter church. 24 members of their former congregation followed them to a 15-acre farm just outside of Kirtland. It was there that things started to go very wrong. Jeff Lundgren began to describe himself as a prophet who was to protect his devoted followers from the fast-approaching day of judgment. He and his wife, constantly working on their followers' minds, soon completely controlled every facet of the cult's lives. The members' free will soon became submerged by Jeff Lundgren's thirst for power and secret obsessions.
He was able, in a very persuasive and manipulative way, to work on persons in their vulnerability at a point of transition and to use them for his own purposes.
All he had to do was to do certain things that he would know, everyone else would interpret as, aha, this must be the prophet.
We were a family. We were all living under Jeff's tent. Jeff was our father. Alice was our mother. Our own parents were not our parents. They did not love us. They were not going to take us to the face of Christ. We weren't going to be able to see and touch and feel Christ. Therefore, they were not our parents. Jeff and Alice were our parents.
Jeffrey Lundgren's house was very neat inside, primarily because Alice Lundgren had the girls, the female cult members, take care of it. Each one was assigned a different task. One was told to do dishes, one was told to do the first floor, and so on.
The women in the group, were they assigned certain tasks?
Yeah. Yeah.
Were you assigned a task?
My job was to take care of the children.
Little or anything was done by Alice herself. She designated the responsibilities. We all had our own chores we were supposed to do, but Alice did little, if anything.
Alice would spend numerous days sleeping in until noon or whatever, and if one of the members did something to her or did something she didn't like, I was told that she would stay in bed until Jeff would talk to the person to have that person change or apologize to Alice.
Jeff Lundgren played everyone against each other. Jeff Lundgren was a master of manipulation. That's why he was able to get a group as large as he had to do the things that they did.
We were not allowed to talk amongst each other. That was called secret combinations or murmuring, and we were not allowed. If we had a problem, we went to them.
I think they were all fearful of one another. They were all fearful of Jeff Lundgren. I don't think they really understood who was doing what and what each other's roles truly were.
I would be told one thing, Sharon would be told something else, Richard would be told something else. All the same baseline story, but with just a few changes to fit our needs. So everybody was walking around the house with different perceptions of every given situation.
Did it evolve into a situation where they believed that Jeff was a prophet?
Yes.
Did you believe Jeff was a prophet?
At one time I did.
I still see her as his cheerleader. I still see her saying, Jeff, just who are you? Long before he was ever saying that he was a seer or a prophet, a revelator. So I don't know. Did she help convince him? Was she part of the brainwashing of him? Is he brainwashed?
Later in time, he started saying he was a seer of God. And basically, he told the members that he was the link between man and God for the second coming.
The day that we moved out to the farm, I walked into the dining room, and from one end to the other were shotguns, bandoleros full of bullets, a few handguns, some knives, and it wasn't even all of the weapons I found out later that they had.
All the male members of the group were given military rank by Jeff. Jeff was, I believe, a 4-star general. He was the one who was obviously in charge.
They had talked about that someday there would be holy battles, that, Old Testament kind of stuff, that the temple was a fortress, someday that, that's where God would return, and someday there would be a point that there would be a battle, and that would be our shelter.
And Jeff's plan was that on May 3rd of the unknown year, God would arise. He would come back to the temple, and to prepare the temple for God, to give it back to God, Jeff had to cleanse the vineyards, and that meant killing people who were living in the adjacent church-owned homes and church officials.
Jeff and Alice Lundgren convinced their followers that the approaching day of judgment would require a blood sacrifice, a human sacrifice. But the cult was also to be involved in another of Jeff's warped fantasies, extraordinary sexual acts which involved many of the women in the group. The cult became an expression of Jeff's more personal desires, graphically demonstrating his control over every aspect of his followers' lives. He even demanded that the women act out sexual scenes for him, group acts, in which Alice played a crucial role.
Jeff's scripture taught them that they had to dance naked for him, the other members of the group, with a veil covering him, with Alice at his side, as she masturbated him into the girls' panties. And then the girls had to put the underwear back on and take his gifts back to their husbands.
Just imagine some biblical scene becoming the setting for some grade Z porno movie, and that's really what it was about.
For you and I, it might be hard to understand a wife sitting there masturbating her husband while some woman dances naked. But it's all part of proffering this to the group, because what they planned was that if they took over the temple, Alice Lundgren was going to be what she wanted to be. She would be the queen bee. She would be the wife of the prophet, and the wife of the prophet would be afforded all kinds of opportunities, all kinds of notoriety, all kinds of riches, all kinds of, I suppose, everything that she wanted.
As the months slipped by, one of the constants of Jeff Lundgren's preaching was that the day of judgment was rapidly approaching. A day that Jeff was certain would coincidentally arrive on his birthday, May 3rd. Jeff continued to preach that this day would have to be ushered in with a human sacrifice, and he began to look among his flock for his intended victims. He found them in the Avery family, devoted followers who would soon become sacrificial lambs.
The Averys actually followed Jeff here. The Averys, Dennis Avery, the father, knew Jeff Lundgren, I guess, from Missouri. And he is the one that persuaded Cheryl Avery to bring them and the three kids here.
Jeff Lundgren believed and maintained a certain standard that the man must be the household of the family and the wife must be the follower. From what's been told and testified to is that Dennis Avery was not very strong. His wife was very domineering, and she ran the household. So the family did not meet Jeffrey Lundgren's standards.
At some point, it was obvious that he made up his mind to murder the Avery family. Their exclusion from the meetings, the fact that other people in the group knew that they had been singled out, the fact that there were 10 slots available for people who were going to be purged from the group, the fact that 5 people got reprieves because they demonstrated their commitment, and the Averys were not even given the opportunity to recognize that they had been slotted to be killed. All of which tells me Lundgren planned to kill the Averys no matter what.
Do you recall Jeff asking the Averys to come into town? Did you know what they were being called into town for?
I suspected that it was the sacrifice.
She knew that pit was being dug. That pit didn't get dug the day before. They spent a week doing that. Richard Brand was sent out to buy lime. Alice was aware of all of that.
She conspired with 12 other people. They sat around, they had scriptural classes, they talked about the death of the Averys, they talked about how the Averys might be killed. They talked specifically about how the girls might be killed.
Had he talked to you about that?
Yes and no. I mean, it was like, not directly, but indirectly. You'd have to be stupid not to know what he was up to.
Why would Alice go along with Jeff's obsession to kill 5 innocent people, 3 of them children? Using revealing courtroom testimony and Alice's actual confession, we'll discover what mysterious role she actually played in the murderous plans. The killings were all prepared, all planned in detail. But as the murders were just about to take place, Alice left the farm. She was never to see the Averys again.
She took another one of the members of the group to the grocery store the afternoon of the killings and told Debbie what to make for dinner that evening, what Jeff liked for the Averys' last supper, if you will.
Dennis and Cheryl came over, and I fixed dinner for them. And when dinner was over, Jeff asked me to take he asked me to take Jason and Kristen and Caleb and leave. So I did.
Alice left with 3 of her children. Her eldest son, Damon, stayed behind at the farm. She drove a few miles to a friend's house where she planned to spend the evening. Back at the farm, the Averys were led to the barn behind the house, gagged with duct tape, and thrown into a pit. Meanwhile, Alice took Jason, her 15-year-old son, to a nearby video store where she rented a movie for the evening. In the barn, the Averys were shot execution style in the back of the head. Within minutes, 5 innocent people were dead. After the murders, the cult fled to West Virginia and began to split apart. 8 months later, the Averys' bodies were found in a common grave.
Our department got a telephone call from Special Agent Larry Scott in Kansas City, who told us he had an informant who contended there were 5 bodies buried in a barn on Route 6. On the night of January 3rd, 1990, we started to excavate the scene. And about 9:07 p.m., we found the first body. That body was later identified as being the body of Dennis Avery.
The Lundgrens were tracked down in San Diego and arrested to stand trial for murder. Why would Alice calmly spend the night of the murders without calling the police? Why did she allow innocent children she knew to die? At her trial, the jury had to decide whether she was powerless and brainwashed, or whether she was a willing, active participant in the horrific plan to kill the Averys.
I went to him and I said, "Are you really saying that you're going to kill people?" And he said, no, this is just a test of faith. I'm not going to do anything. Don't worry about it.
I believe that she thought that he was testing the will of these people, because he had told her he was testing the will of the people, and that once he saw that the people were with him, that he then would back off.
Months passed before I knew specifically what had happened. He did tell me, though, that
When I look at the videotape, what I see is someone who's not telling the truth. What I see is someone who is trying to minimize her involvement. Every time anybody asked her a question, there were 2 ATF agents who were doing the interviews. When they asked her pointed questions, she managed to skirt it. She would shift her body position. She would do things. Yeah, she would pick at her face. She would look down. She would pause. There were some very long pauses when she was asked questions, and that was because she wanted an opportunity to think of what she was going to say.
Did he tell you where they were buried?
No, but I knew that they were in the barn.
What made you draw that conclusion?
I don't remember why I knew it, but I knew that's where it was.
There's no love that's that strong that you're going to stand by your husband while he kills 5 innocent children and she runs off and protects her own. What about the Avery kids, Alice? What about their little bodies laying in that grave?
Did you attempt to do anything about it? Did you report this to the authorities? And can you explain why you didn't do that?
Because I was afraid he'd do it to me, too, if I did.
She could have escaped at any time that she lived in Ohio, right up to the very time the people were being bound and gagged with duct tape and shot, execution style. She was in that car, and she could have escaped then, and it's less than 2 miles from that farm to the police station.
If those bodies had not been found, you'd still not be telling anybody that your husband was a cold-blooded murderer. Isn't that true?
That's true.
That's true.
At one point in the trial, the coroner was testifying, and we were using the autopsy photographs. We were using photographs of the bodies right after they had been exhumed. And for most people, those pictures are so horrifying, they're so graphic, and they're so ugly that they can't look at them. I mean, jurors would not look at them when we presented them at the end of the trial. But not one of them got past Alice. I mean, she was curious, she was interested. That, to me, suggested someone who could be so detached from it that she could see the bodies of people that she knew. She could see the body of Karen Avery and not shed a tear. Not shed one tear.
On August 29th, 1990, the jury handed down its verdict. Jeff Lundgren was found guilty of murder in the first degree and sentenced to death. Surprisingly to many observers, Jeff's accomplices at the barn received relatively short prison terms, even though they had been directly involved in the murders. But Alice Lundgren was not so fortunate. Though she was not present at the killings, Alice received a sentence of 150 years. For both Alice and her husband, their day of judgment had finally arrived. A little late, but no less certain. Was Alice Lundgren's real crime that she allowed her humanity to be submerged by her husband's obsessive thirst for power? Or was she herself cold and calculating, an evil woman? Perhaps no one will ever be sure, but the jury gave her the rest of her life to ponder her acts. I'm Teresa Saldana. Join me again next time for another journey into the criminal mind on Confessions of Crime.